Beneath the indifferent churn of waves and the endless blue, a strange, silent city of iron and rubber lay waiting. For decades, the sea had kept its secret an improbable graveyard of heavy machinery, where loaders, cranes, trucks, trailers, buses and minibuses rested as if the ocean had tried to build its own fleet. The first divers who found them did not discover neat rows, but a scattered menagerie of industrial giants, some half buried in silt, others poised upright or unexpectedly. Level ground at close range, the machines told their stories. Paint was modeled and softened by salt. Rivets and welds wore halos of rust. A loader's bucket still held the jagged fossils of marine growth. A crane's boom supported a coral garden. Tires, once solid and black, had become pale rings clinging to axles. Windshields were fractured or missing, and in the glint of a diver's lamp one could see the outline of steering wheels frozen in the act of decisions now beyond reach. These were not artifacts arranged for display, but remnants of hurried uses, deferred maintenance, and the accidents that punctuate industrial life. Small markings offered clues. Serial numbers, license plates, and company logos, partly illegible, but sometimes intact, became breadcrumbs for an investigation that rapid publicity turned into a public obsession. Local historians combed archives and discovered ledger entries and correspondence that hinted at hurried disposals during economic downturns and at storms that had overwhelmed port operations. Longtime dock workers recalled nights when equipment was moved in haste, when paperwork was thin and explanations thinner still. The histories that emerged were fragmentary, an assembly of memory and ink. The divers approached their task with the methodical reverence of archaeologists. Every frame was photographed. Every plaque and tag was recorded. Corrosion patterns were studied as if they were stratigraphy. Where a trailer's floor had collapsed, silt had collected like slow sedimentary deposits, preserving unlikely items: a child's plastic toy, a crumpled pair of sunglasses, a rust-proof tin containing a few water-bleached receipts. Such human traces turned the site from a story about machines into a story about people. Hands that had gripped steering wheels, voices that had given coordinates, lunches tucked under seats. Scientists quickly joined the effort. Oceanographers mapped currents and seabed topography to understand how such a heterogeneous fleet could come to rest in one area, while materials scientists analyzed metal fatigue and corrosion to estimate timeframes. Their models suggested a confluence of factors. Storm surges had likely swept equipment from poorly secured yards. Lax regulations and cost-cutting after economic slumps had encouraged shortcuts in disposal. Certain seabed contours acted as natural traps where debris accumulated. No single cause explained everything, and the mosaic of evidence spoke to overlapping failures of weather, economy, and oversight. Ecologists filled some of those gaps by describing how life had seized the opportunity. Where the machines sat hard, substrates appeared in an otherwise soft, sandy plain, and the result was a surge in biological diversity. Sponges, tunicates, and encrusting corals colonized beams and wheel hubs. Small fish and crustaceans found shelter in engine compartments. Entire caverns. The divers watched as an old bus roof became a reef ledge, populated by a medley of brittle stars and small anemones. Scientists called it the artificial reef effect, but to the divers the transformation felt more like reclamation. The sea had taken instruments of movement and made them harbors for life, but the ecological upside did not erase legal and moral complexity. Journalists' footage of the submerged fleet attracted international attention and fierce debate. Environmentalists demanded accountability and remediation. Port authorities promised investigations. Families who believed they had lost loved ones in storms or accidents wanted answers. Companies with murky disposal records faced scrutiny, and local governments confronted the cost of cleanup versus preservation. Should these machines be removed, risking damage to nascent ecosystems, or left, challenging norms about industrial waste? The choice was not simple. It required balancing restoration with the reality that the sea had already woven the objects into new webs of life. Diving into this landscape was physically demanding and psychologically unnerving. The divers learned to read machinery as one might read a ruined house, the position of a lever, the way a seat was torn. The presence of personal effects told a small biography. In one overturned truck, a logbook lay protected under a dashboard, pages smeared but legible enough to map. A last route. The handwriting stopped abruptly, a final entry followed by a blank. Reading it aloud in the decompression chamber, the team felt a gravity that had nothing to do with weight. These fragments humanized the work. They shifted it from cataloging metal to tracing disrupted lives. That human dimension drove an unusual collaboration. Museums proposed exhibits to contextualize the finds within regional, industrial, and environmental histories. Universities offered to catalog artifacts and study the emerging habitats. Environmental groups suggested designating the site as a controlled sanctuary where selective removal would be permitted only to retrieve explicitly human items. Lawmakers talked of strengthening maritime disposal laws and creating funds, partly financed by penalties, to remediate coastlines and support affected communities. The debate was as much about memory as it was about policy. What to preserve, what to correct, and how to deter future negligence. Engineers wrestled with practical constraints, removing tons of twisted metal from a soft seabed without destroying. The emergent habitat required precision lifting, containment of sediments, and protocols to capture any residual pollutants. Salvage operations risked exposing sharp edges, releasing trapped oils, and disturbing plastics. Leaving the fleet untouched risked perpetuating an industrial footprint in marine environments and tacitly accepting past carelessness. Some proposed hybrid approaches: recover identifiable human artifacts and hazardous components while leaving heavily colonized structures as managed habitats. Each option carried trade-offs and costs. Night dives changed the scene entirely. When divers switched off lamps, the machines did not disappear so much as recede into a deeper drama. Bioluminescent plankton flickered like distant constellations.